Welcome to Solutions with Courtney Anderson. I am Courtney Anderson, and I am your host for this episode and all the other episodes so far. The show today is part of our Joyful Art of Business series, which is basically the umbrella for everything that I do in all the different programs and experiences, which is this concept that, hey, if we're doing some sort of professional endeavor, we're just going to call that business. It doesn't matter if we're a volunteer, doesn't matter if we're paid, doesn't matter if we're an employee, we're an independent contractor, an entrepreneur, an executive, an entry-level, brand new worker, irrelevant. We're just generically calling all those professional endeavors business. And we're trying to tie the measurement and the return on our investment, our ROI, to some sort of emotional or psychological well-being, which we're just sort of generically calling joy, and that our professional endeavors should have some correlation with a positive emotional or psychological outcome. And certainly we all have just a myriad of observations and experiences, and there's a lot of data showing that if we engage in professional activities and then there's just zero joy, and, in fact there's dread or misery or high stress or depression as an outcome, then we're not probably going to be able to optimize our ability in our life, overall to surpass our goals, which is one of course, our foundational principles of all of the different programs and things that I do professionally. So our Joyful Art of Business, in this specific episode, we're exploring something that is entitled The Client Experience Employee, how it transforms careers. So we're talking about something called the Client Experience Employee. And I coined this term largely initially was out of frustration, because as I've shared, I've had this great opportunity to go around the world and go to all different types of organizations and for-profit organizations and non-profit and new organizations and legacy organizations and teeny tiny small organizations and huge, large, global organizations. And it's been exciting and interesting. Yet I've seen some consistency, especially in the last couple of years, with frustration on the part of employees that makes it sometimes challenging to be able to open up solution opportunities and to implement changes because there's such a resistance. So the basic issue that I kept observing over and over again, and again, all over the world, is employees expressing and using words like they were disrespected, that the employer didn't care about them, that it seemed to cause them pain. Like it pained them. It came out as frustration or anger, or disgust or rage, even in some situations. But underneath that, it was really evident that the person's in pain. They're hurt. They are hurt by their perception that the employer doesn't care. The employer is just ignoring them. The employer doesn't listen to them. The employer, discards them. And once that position is sort of claimed, then it makes it incredibly difficult. Again, not something we can't do and that we don't do. Of course, that's what we do is get the optimal solution that we can. But it becomes very difficult to problem solve, to work to negotiate when one party is just operating from an emotional, reactive position and they're hurt. And I think initially when I first started to see this, I didn't quite understand it. Many of the things that I do are corporate education programs where I create solutions for specific clients, and then I go, deliver those to their different populations of the organization to ensure that we're changing the behavior, that people are understanding what the expectations are, and that they change their behavior, understanding what the consequence will be. But sometimes I go in and I do just sort of on the ground dispute resolution, or we're dealing with a specific maybe individual, typically they're high ranking, and we need to have some sort of process to try to see what we can do to change behavior and to change some outcomes. And when I do things where I'm problem solving between groups, where I'm not just there creating programs and delivering educational experiences that are entertaining and exciting, I'm wearing my hat as sort of as an arbitrator or a mediator. And so arbitration and mediation are two different things that come from the legal field. And the idea is that you have a dispute, and an arbitrator and a mediator are ways for you to solve your problem without having to go all the way to court and to the outcome in court, which would be like a trial. And in arbitration and in mediation, you're not in the courthouse, but you have problems, and you go to this person. Sometimes there might be a couple of people in some arbitrations. But basically, you don't go to a courthouse. It's informal. It's not the rules of law. And you just go somewhere, usually an office complex, and you sit in a room with either an arbitrator or a mediator or a group of arbitrators. And what's happening? Well, both sides of a dispute will share their stories. And basically, in general, when I do mediations as a mediator, I listen to both sides. I use all my different techniques to ensure that I'm getting the best understanding of their perspective, of what they believe the obstacles to resolution are, things of that nature. And then I help the two parties come to an agreement on their own volition. Right, so literally just work item by item, and we see where there's some movement, where people will yield something or give something, and then they work out the agreement, and then I hammer it out, and we're all sitting in a room, and at the end of it, hopefully we've closed the whole problem, and now we don't have to go to court. And you see these are really popular in the United States in family law cases. Divorces, child custody, just because there's so many of these cases, right? And sometimes the courtroom isn't the best place to share sort of all your personal family situation, especially when there are children involved. And these things are, if you're in court, they're on the record. So, there's a recording of every single mean, horrible thing that's said, which, could be very destructive for family members. And also it totally invades people's privacy. So mediation is really popular. But like I said, mediators just listen to both sides and help work out solutions. The difference is arbitrators listen to both sides, but then the arbitrator actually tells you what the answer is. The arbitrator acts a little bit more like you would think generically like a judge. So in arbitration, I'm listening. Okay, now I'm going to make a ruling. I'm going to tell you what the answer is. That's different, right? The mediator, I'm listening. What do you think? Can you agree to that? Can we change that? Okay, we've got that. We've got an agreement then on point one. Let's go to point two. See, very similar in that they're both alternative dispute resolution, but they have very distinct differences. And I'll do some follow-up programs on those because they're fascinating areas, and I'm moving more back into those types of practices than I used to do. Anyway, here we are, and we're looking at this idea that many employees are frustrated and unhappy and feel that they're not treated correctly. And as I said, initially I didn't understand what was causing all of this anger, and I really didn't grasp how hurt people were. And as I shared, when I do mediations, mostly mediations, arbitrations tend to be about, you're not doing arbitrations on family law issues. I've done those in employment settings. I've done those in more financial matters, things of that nature. But the mediations on family law matters are just so similar. I hear the same words from people in family matters, whether it's a marriage or it was a relationship and then it broke up and maybe there are children involved or property. People are hurt. It's the same type thing. People say, look, they didn't even listen to me. They didn't think about my feelings at all. They unilaterally just went out and made decisions. It's like they don't even care. And so when I came up with this concept of the client experience, and this is going to be part one of a two-part episode. When I came up with the client experience, I thought to myself, I'm hearing the same things I hear when people's, families fall apart. And directed at their former, partner or legal spouse, and they're hurt. And so because they're hurt, they sort of dig their heels in and they refuse to, to work together because they feel like the other party has so disrespected them and hurt them emotionally, ignored them, that now they're raw, they're emotionally just spent. And when I was hearing this at organizations with employees, at first I just didn't get it. I mean, my own life experience has not been one where I've ever had one full-time employment job and that's the only thing I've done. Like, I've never been in that experience. In fact, I've never had a full-time employment job, until I was literally in the last 6 months of my life, when I've accepted a teaching appointment. I've always had my little businesses, and then before that, I was a retail worker or a minimum wage worker, or I did lots of different things when I was a teenager and just starting out on my own and working my way through while I was in school. I never expected anything. When I worked as a waitress in a fast food restaurant, I didn't expect those people were going to care about my schedule. I didn't think they were going to care about, well, here's where I need to take my class, or here's, the study group I need to go to, or that they were going to, have any interest in, meeting my personal needs for, I'd prefer not to have a morning shift. I didn't think that they would care, and I didn't expect them to, so I never had any, stress or disappointment or anger. I just was like, okay. Going into it, I looked at it like, look, I'm taking this job because I need money. I'm not taking this job because I love this industry specifically, that I want to work as a food service worker. I just did it because I needed immediate money, and it was a way for me to get money, and they were hiring. And I was competent enough to be able to do, whatever the job was. Can you, follow these steps that we tell you to use to put things on the food? Okay. Can you answer, can you man the cash register and take orders from people? Yeah, I can do that. So I just didn't expect anything. My only expectations for jobs as an employee have always been that, A, they're going to follow the basic bare minimum law. And the law is that you have to pay me my minimum wages, whatever we agree to. You have to pay me on the payday that you said you would. These are all, laws in almost every part of the world. And beyond that, I don't need anything else. And I don't expect anything else. I don't expect you to care about me. I don't expect you to get to know me. I don't expect you to invest in, what are my careers, aspirations? Is there any way that they can mentor me? How can they help develop me as a professional person? I didn't look for any of that. All I looked for that I expected from them, that I would have gotten upset if it hadn't happened, is, we agreed you're going to pay me X amount of dollars, and that I'm going to get paid, whatever, every Friday or every Wednesday, and that's it. Like, give me my money that I'm due on whatever arrangement we had. At that point, with those jobs, it was hourly, and then pay me. And as long as they did that, they were meeting the minimum legal requirements, I didn't have anything else to say. And then I went right from that to teaching, not as a full-time employee at universities, and then I went into my law practice where, I was the boss. And so then I had huge expectations, but I wasn't asking anybody else to do anything. I mean, I was, wearing my entrepreneur hat and trying to figure it all out from that perspective. So I've never been in the position myself where I expected an employer to do all these sort of emotional things, to listen to me, to take advice that I give them, to care about me, to provide stability for me, to provide some sort of long-term, almost a guarantee, like as long as I show up and, quote, do what I'm supposed to, do my job, then they should, keep me here so that I can, continue on making this money and doing, whatever it is I do. I never expected that. And in all fairness, obviously, even when I was a teenager and then, working, finishing school, I was, in law school by the time I was 20 years old. So I had a lot of extra knowledge about sort of what the legal basics were, and I also knew what, my rights were. I recently did a show where we talked about, if you're in a situation and you hate your job, cool. Then you have the legal right in most parts of the world, depending on the terms of your agreement, to leave. You're not a slave. You're not an indentured servant. If you are, that's blatantly illegal. It does happen. I'm aware of it. It's all over the world. That's a serious issue, but that's not a legal contract, right? In most parts of the world, I have the right to my own freedom and my freedom of labor. Or, and if I don't want to work here, I don't have to. You can't make me. I'm not a slave. I'm not an indentured servant. I'm not a serf, or I'm tied for my entire life to a certain plot of land and to do a certain task. I'm free. I'm a free person. So if I don't want to work here, I don't have to. And I also, again, in all fairness, wasn't working any of these jobs as my only sort of option in life. I mean, I was doing, working a job while I was going to school. And even when I got, my first professional opportunity at a large university, part of the reason that I maybe made some not great choices in terms of thinking, if I wanted, be in teaching, that, here are the steps I would need to take. If I wanted to be in teaching and, as my full-time career, I was totally focused on opening up my law practice the whole time. So I've always done things and felt like, okay, there's a great, win-win. They follow the bare minimum for the bare minimum sort of payment jobs. That all I wanted was my money. And then for the professional jobs, I was excited and I was learning things and I was, fired up. But I didn't go into that situation, and I never had just like one full-time job that I expected like this was all I was going to do. I was always, again, doing another program or getting ready to, have a business. So I've just never been in that position where I had all my eggs in one basket financially, and I've never been in a position where I had my eggs in that basket emotionally. And that's what's thrown me, as I put together this program and I struggle. Like I said, this all comes out of frustration because I really couldn't understand and wrap my head around, why are these people so upset? I mean, it's just a job, right? That's what I'm thinking. And if I say something like that, it just offends people, to no end. What do you mean it's just a job? And that makes sense, right? Because a lot of the, the organizations, almost every organization I've been to around the world does a lot on their side, right? To, we want employee loyalty. We want, you to feel that you're part of our family, or whatever kind of, marketing they do to their team, because of course they are trying to keep their costs down by hiring people and then keeping people who are, performing at their expectations and not having to hire somebody else. I mean, that costs them money. So I'm not saying that there hasn't been sort of like maybe analogous to this relationship situation where maybe somebody feels that they were led on by the other party initially. You promised me, forever, and I never knew you were seeing someone else. It's sort of like that, I think. And in the interest of pragmatism and everything that my programs and everything that I, my worldview, then I've created sort of these concepts to try to help to do what I could proactively on the employee side. Ideally, should an employee and an employer maybe look at their relationship somewhat analogous to a family? Ideally, a loving, functioning family? Ideally, yes. I always balk whenever employers want to, just sprinkle, family references all over their materials for their, for their staff. I know why they're doing it, because you kind of want this, this loyalty, this confidentiality, this, family first type vibe, and ideally you're trying to appeal to some sort of hopefully positive experience for a lot of your employees where I love my great grandma, and if my employer is like great grandma, then I'll do anything, right? For great grandma, I'll do anything for my employer. I kind of see where they're coming from. I still think it's not a good idea because A, not everybody has a great grandma that they had that, relationship with, or maybe they did and now they're sad because, great grandma's gone, or maybe they never had any family and they grew up in a foster care system or an orphanage. I don't know, but I wouldn't touch that. I personally don't think it's a good idea, but I understand why people do it. You're trying to elicit a lot of things you can't require, and you're trying to make people feel so emotionally invested in the employee and the employer and the organization that they'll go above and beyond. They won't ask a lot of questions. And maybe let's be more idealistic. Maybe some people actually do feel that way. I certainly have worked with a lot of organizations that started off as family organizations. Literally, it was a family business, and so people in that situation really do have a very understandable reason for saying, hey, look, this was my grandpa and grandma and the kitchen table, and and my parents and myself, and this literally was our family, and we, base our business around what our family does and how our family believes, and that's a really good thing. And in fact, many family organizations have such incredible advantages, right? Because literally they are relatives and they have these deep bonds that when they're healthy and function are just incredibly advantageous. So I'm not necessarily totally knocking it. I'm just saying that typically, unless you're only a family firm, and meaning that everybody that works there is family, when you start to bring in other people who aren't, then it becomes really difficult as you grow to expand that. And it also, I think, triggers a lot of potential negative consequences in people who don't have that same, healthy, functioning family reference, and it just becomes potentially a negative. So that's why other than the organization that's entirely a family organization, I don't advise using all that. Aren't we family? We're like family. The other thing is, I think it's part of the problem when people become so angry, and like I said, they're hurt. And I've gone places to give educational events where people, literally start screaming at me. How dare you come here? This place is horrible. Okay. I'm glad they're expressing themselves, and I'm glad they're expressing themselves to me because I'm totally the right person for them to do that. That's part of why we, have the program with an outsider, because I do want to know what's going on. That's why I'm there, partially. The other reality is the mediator in me, the arbitrator in me, and the part of me that really does want people to have some sense of joy in their lives. It hurts me when I see people in so much emotional pain over things that sometimes are they're just incompatible with reality. And what I mean by that is what I put in the show notes. When you have a situation where one party expects that it's going to be, almost like an ideal spouse or a partner, right? You're going to care about me. You're going to consult with me. You're not going to do things that will make me unhappy. You're going to listen to me. If I tell you that this is a horrible idea and that here's why, you're going to understand that and you're going to adhere to that, and you're not going to do things that I've warned you not to do. And then we're going to both be in this ongoing, long-term, mutually beneficial relationship, and for all, for basically, hopefully, till we cease to exist or or retire. And that's what people, I think, that's where it comes from. I think their expectations are so high as employees. They really do want emotionally care about me. Show me that you appreciate me. Do you even acknowledge me? Do I matter to you? And then they get really upset, it seems, when they have great ideas. So they'll start, talking about something that's legitimately a legitimate organizational issue. It's not anything they're making up, right? And it needs to be improved. And they'll tell you, what it is, and they'll explain it, and I'm nodding my head thinking, I'm with you. That sounds like a horrible way that they've been doing that. And they'll share their perspective or their practice or their solution, either that they've implemented or that they know is going to be effective, and I'm still with them. I hear you. That's great. And then they get to a point where they just get so bitter, and they start to say things like, you know what? I'm fed up. I'm fed up with this place. I care. I want the best. And I care, and and this is wrong, and that's wrong, and then the way they do this is wrong, and I'm trying to tell them, how to fix it and make it better, and they just don't even care. It's just wrong, and I just want it to be, better. Okay, that's when I don't understand what's happening. Look, the whole idea is that in modern times, so not historically how it used to be, but like today. I've done other shows, and I've done shows on trying to explain, at least in the U.S. and in general, how employment legally works. I said a little while ago that they can't force you. No one can force you, in most parts of the world, to be a slave. That you have the right to your own labor. You have the right to accept or decline. You have the right to to leave an employment situation if you don't want to stay there. That's a big deal. In the history of humans, goodness, the pain and the just the evil, I hate to use that word, that that humans have inflicted on other humans, literally owning other people. So this isn't something that I think humans have learned sort of intrinsically. In our history, it's pretty recent that we are, at least in general, the majority, seeing that that all humans have value, and that the ability of a human to be able to control their labor, or to earn wages, or to be free, not be a slave, is kind of a advanced, advantageous thing. But that's a relatively new thing in the history of humans, right? So from the current perspective, I am a huge advocate of people have the right to their own labor. And I do not believe in slavery. I don't believe in indentured servitude. I actually don't even believe in a lot of things I've seen recently in the U.S. and around the world, where people exploit people who have either less education or less options, and basically turn them into someone who can't really leave. Sometimes people do this with minors, with people who are literally children. Sometimes people just do it with someone who doesn't know better. And I'm completely opposed to this, and I'm going to try to do more even in the future. This is just, the individual right of a human to control their own right to labor and their own ability to earn something for their time is, I believe, just a global, again, human issue. So I'm totally in favor of that. The other side of that equation, though, works the same way to a certain extent. When you had, models in the past where people, maybe they were just in a situation where they were owned, and maybe they did feel that they were compensated in some way for their labor, and they actually liked their situation. They had a lot of stability. So I'm not talking about people who were slaves or enslaved. I'm talking maybe someone who worked a farm, or somebody that was a serf in a feudal system. Although that's also not the best argument, but you can see how when you have no freedom of labor and you sort of can't do anything differently, that you also have the employer gives you sort of, hey, you're here, right? Like this, you don't have to go look for another job. You're not worried about a resume. You're not concerned about, do I need to go back to school and get a new skill? Do I need to learn some kind of new technology? No, like just we just keep this going. You have a thing to do. Get up every day and do it. And I guess there was some level of stability. This is not an articulate argument at all, and I'm sure I'm upsetting people, and I don't mean to. What I'm trying to argue is this. When you have increased individual autonomy and mobility, then you also have gotten reflectively, which makes sense, that employers tend to feel like, okay, well, if the employee can just get up and go at any time, and I have less and less control, then I also am going to have less and less responsibility. So in many parts of the world, you have done away with guaranteed lifetime employment. Yeah, you do have it. You have it in the States, in the U.S., in some jobs. But there's a lot of public debate, and there's a lot of political pressure put on these types of things. Because the argument is, why do some people get this benefit where they get to a point and all of a sudden you can't fire them, unless they do something horrible, violent or illegal or something. I don't have an answer for that. I just know that if you have a situation where you are under a long-term, you have it in writing, either individually an employment contract or collectively you're in a group that's bargained for one, where they cannot fire you. And it says in your contract they have to get your approval before the employer can make a decision. That they have to take into consideration your personal life and your family history and your preferred work schedule, and that they can't change your schedule. They're forbidden, from taking you and making you come in the evening when you know that you don't like to be working in the evening. You like to work in the morning. If you have a contract that guarantees that to you and it's in writing, then that's a totally different situation. We're nearing the end of part one of this episode, and so I just want to clarify. Some people are not out of bounds with the expectations they have for their employer because they have a written contract that says the employer has to do these things, has to consult them, can't change their schedule. And then that's a very different situation. But that is a minority of people in the world, and it is definitely a minority of people in the U.S. So as we close part one, I encourage you, please join me for part two so we can talk about what the client experience is, which is where you treat an employer as a client. You see them as a client, and you take away all this extra expectation, and how it can make you more successful, less stressed out, and happier. So join me for part two, and thank you for joining me for part one. And as always, you can come to CourtneyAnderson.com for more information. Thanks.